Chapter 1. The forest greeted me before the house did. Even with the car engine ticking as it cooled, I could hear the hush of the pines, the soft rustle of branches brushing against one another like old friends whispering secrets. The air smelled like damp earth and cedar, the kind of scent that settles into your lungs and makes you feel like you've stepped into a memory instead of a place. My grandmother's cottage sat at the end of the gravel drive, small and weathered and impossibly familiar, even though I hadn't been here in years. The porch light was out, the windows dark, but the house didn't feel empty. It felt expectant. I stood there for a moment with my suitcase in hand, letting the quiet wrap around me. After months of noise and stress, and the kind of grief that gnaws at you from the inside, the silence felt like a balm. My grandmother had always said the woods were alive, that they watched over her. As a child, I'd believed her without question. As an adult, I'd chalked it up to her whimsical imagination. But standing here now, with the trees leaning in and the air holding its breath, I wasn't so sure. The porch steps creaked under my weight as I climbed them, the sound echoing in the stillness. I fumbled with the key, my fingers stiff from the cold, and pushed the door open. The scent of lavender and old books drifted out, so familiar it made my throat tighten. The cottage looked exactly the same, crooked picture frames, mismatched furniture, the quilt she'd sewn draped over the back of the couch. It was like she'd just stepped out for a walk and would be back any minute. I set my suitcase down and wandered through the rooms, touching the edges of tables, the backs of chairs, the worn wooden banister. Everything felt like her. Everything felt like home. And yet, beneath the comfort, there was a hollow ache. She wasn't here. She never would be again. By the time I made it to the kitchen, the sun had dipped low enough that the windows glowed with the last traces of gold. I filled a glass with water, leaning against the counter as I drank, letting the quiet settle deeper into my bones. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. Peaceful, but not empty. The house hummed with a kind of presence, subtle but unmistakable. When the first soft hoot echoed from outside, I nearly dropped the glass. I froze, listening. Another hoot followed, low and melodic, drifting through the open window like a greeting. I set the glass down slowly and walked to the door, my heartbeat quickening for reasons I couldn't explain. The porch was bathed in twilight, the sky shifting from lavender to deep blue. And there, perched on the railing as if he'd been waiting for me, was a large white owl. He was beautiful, strikingly so. His feathers were pale and soft-looking, almost luminous in the fading light. His eyes were a pale, silvery gold, sharp and intelligent, fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. He didn't flinch when I stepped outside. He didn't spread his wings or shift his weight. He simply watched me, calm and steady, as though he recognized me. A strange warmth bloomed in my chest, unexpected and disarming. I'd seen owls before, of course, but never one like this. Never one that made me feel seen. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely carrying over the quiet. The owl tilted his head, the movement slow and deliberate, as if he were considering my words. The breeze lifted my hair, brushing it across my cheek, and the owl's feathers ruffled in response. For a moment, it felt like the two of us were the only living things in the world, suspended in a pocket of twilight where time moved differently. I took a small step closer. He didn't move. "You're not afraid of me," I murmured. Another soft hoot, almost gentle, almost reassuring. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Were you my grandmother's?" The question sounded ridiculous the moment it left my mouth, but something about him made it feel less absurd. My grandmother had always spoken about the forest as if it were a companion, a guardian. She'd told stories of animals that watched over her, of a presence in the woods that kept her safe. I'd laughed at the time. Now, standing here with this owl staring at me like he understood every word, I wasn't laughing. The owl blinked slowly, his gaze unwavering. Then, with a soft rustle of feathers, he hopped closer along the railing. My heart skipped. He was close enough now that I could see the subtle patterns in his plumage, the faint shimmer of moonlight reflecting off his wings. "You're beautiful," I whispered. He let out a quiet sound, something between a hoot and a sigh, and for a moment, I felt something shift in the air. A subtle hum, like the forest itself was leaning in to listen. The owl lowered his head slightly, and I had the strange, overwhelming sense that he was bowing. Before I could react, he lifted one foot and released something onto the railing. A single feather, long and white and impossibly soft-looking, drifted down and landed at my feet. I stared at it, then at him. For me, he didn't answer, of course. But he didn't need to. The feather glowed faintly in the dim light, as if holding onto the last traces of the sun. I bent down to pick it up, and when I straightened, the owl spread his wings in one smooth, powerful motion. The wind stirred around us, cool and gentle, and then he lifted off the railing, soaring into the darkening sky with a grace that made my chest ache. I watched him disappear into the trees, the shadows swallowing him whole. The forest seemed to exhale, the branches swaying softly as if acknowledging his departure. I stood there for a long moment, the feather clutched in my hand, the night settling around me like a blanket. Something was different here. Something was watching. Something was waiting. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel alone. I stepped back inside the cottage, closing the door gently behind me. The feather glowed faintly in my palm, warm against my skin. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know why the owl had come to me, or why his presence felt like a memory I couldn't quite reach. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This place was alive. And it had just welcomed me home. Chapter 2. The morning light filtered through the curtains in thin, golden stripes, warming the wooden floorboards and coaxing me awake far earlier than I intended. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the quiet hum of the forest outside. It was different from the silence of the city, softer, deeper, layered with subtle sounds that felt almost like breathing. A distant bird call, the rustle of leaves, the faint creak of branches shifting in the breeze. It was peaceful in a way that made my chest loosen, as if the woods were gently urging me to slow down. The feather from last night lay on the nightstand where I'd placed it before bed. In the morning light, it looked even more delicate, almost translucent, with faint patterns that reminded me of frost on a window. I reached out and brushed my fingers along its edge. A soft warmth pulsed through my fingertips, subtle enough that I might have imagined it. But I didn't think I had. The memory of the owl watching me, steady, unafraid, almost knowing, lingered in my mind like a dream I wasn't ready to let go of. I wasn't sure why his presence had affected me so deeply. Maybe it was the loneliness of the past few months catching up with me. Maybe it was the weight of grief. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something I didn't have a name for yet. After breakfast, I pulled on a sweater and stepped outside, letting the cool morning air wash over me. The forest stretched out behind the cottage, dense and inviting, the trails winding between tall pines and moss-covered stones. My grandmother had walked these paths every day, sometimes twice. She used to tell me the forest was a friend, that it spoke to her in ways she couldn't explain. As a child, I'd believed her wholeheartedly. As an adult, I'd forgotten how to listen. Maybe it was time to remember. The trail was soft beneath my boots, the earth damp from last night's dew. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in shifting patches, illuminating ferns and wildflowers that brushed against my legs as I walked. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became, as if the forest were drawing me in, wrapping me in its calm. I breathed in the scent of pine and damp leaves, letting it settle into my bones. After a while, the path opened into a clearing I didn't remember from childhood. It was small and circular, surrounded by tall trees whose branches arched overhead like a natural cathedral. The air here felt different, warmer, almost humming with a quiet energy that prickled along my skin. I stepped into the center, turning slowly, taking it all in. It felt sacred somehow, like a place meant for secrets. A soft crunch of leaves behind me made me spin around. A man stood at the edge of the clearing. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. He was tall, with dark hair that fell in soft waves around his face, and eyes so pale they almost glowed in the filtered sunlight. His clothes were simple, dark jeans, a fitted shirt, but there was something about him that felt out of place, as if he didn't quite belong to the world I knew. He watched me with a stillness that reminded me of the owl, calm and unblinking, as though he'd been expecting me. "Hello," he said softly. His voice was low and warm, carrying easily through the quiet clearing. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how alone we were out here. "Hi," I managed. "I didn't think anyone else lived near here." He smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I don't live far." There was something familiar about him, though I couldn't place it. A strange tug in my chest, like a memory just out of reach. I took a small step closer without meaning to. "I'm Mara," I said, my voice steadier this time. "I know," he replied. I blinked. "You know." His expression softened, almost apologetic. "Your grandmother spoke of you often." A small ache bloomed in my chest at the mention of her. "You knew her?" He nodded. "She was a remarkable woman." I looked around the clearing, suddenly seeing it through her eyes. "She loved this place." "She did," he said quietly. "She said it made her feel safe." I studied him, trying to understand why he felt so familiar. His eyes held mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken, but not in a frightening way. More like recognition. As if he saw something in me I didn't yet understand. "What's your name?" I asked. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then said Rowan. The name suited him, soft, earthy, ancient somehow. I repeated it in my mind, letting it settle. "Well, Rowan," I said, "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just exploring." "You're not intruding," he said quickly. "You're welcome here." There was something in his tone, something warm and earnest, that made my breath catch. He stepped closer, the sunlight catching in his pale eyes, and for a moment, the world felt strangely still. The forest seemed to lean in, listening. "You should be careful in the woods at night," he said gently. "They're different after dark." I frowned. "Different how?" He opened his mouth as if to answer, then closed it again, his jaw tightening. "Just trust me." A shiver ran down my spine, though not from fear. More like anticipation. Like the feeling you get right before a storm breaks, when the air is charged and waiting. Before I could ask anything else, a breeze swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves overhead. I glanced up at the sound, and when I looked back down, he was gone. No footsteps. No sound. No movement. Just empty space where he'd been standing a heartbeat before. I spun in a slow circle, scanning the trees, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he'd dissolved into the forest itself. My heart thudded in my chest, a mix of confusion and something else, something warm and electric that I didn't have a name for. I stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet settle around me again. The clearing felt different now, charged with the echo of his presence. I didn't know who Rowan was, or how he'd known my name, or why he felt so familiar. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't just a stranger in the woods. And whatever had drawn me to this place, whatever had brought me back to my grandmother's cottage, was only just beginning to reveal itself. When I finally turned to leave, the forest felt alive behind me, watching, waiting, whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. Not yet. Chapter 3. The cottage felt different when I returned from the woods, as if the air inside had shifted in some subtle way. Maybe it was me who had changed, maybe Rowan's sudden appearance in the clearing had unsettled something deep inside me, something I hadn't realized was waiting to be stirred. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. The feather I'd left on the kitchen table caught the afternoon light, glowing faintly like a sliver of moon trapped in daylight. I walked toward it slowly, my fingers brushing its soft edge. It felt warm again, a gentle pulse beneath my touch, as if it held a heartbeat. I didn't know what to make of any of it, the owl, the man, the way he'd known my name, the way he'd vanished without a sound. It all felt like pieces of a story I'd forgotten, one I was only now remembering how to read. My grandmother had always spoken in riddles about the forest, about guardians and watchers, and the way the woods protected those who respected them. I'd always assumed she meant it metaphorically. But now, I wasn't so sure. I carried the feather with me as I wandered through the cottage, letting my fingers trail along the familiar surfaces. The house was full of her scent, her warmth, her quiet magic. I found myself drawn to her old reading nook by the window, the one with the faded armchair and the stack of books that never seemed to move. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunlight, drifting like tiny spirits. I sank into the chair, the cushion sighing beneath me, and let my gaze wander over the shelves. One book stood out, a leather-bound journal tucked between two thick novels. It looked older than the others, the spine cracked, the edges worn soft by years of handling. I reached for it, feeling a strange flutter in my chest as my fingers closed around the cover. The moment I opened it, the scent of lavender and old paper washed over me, familiar and comforting. The first page held my grandmother's handwriting, elegant, looping, unmistakably hers. For the one who comes after me. My breath caught. I traced the words with my fingertip, feeling the weight of them settle over me. I turned the page slowly, careful not to tear the fragile paper. The next entry was dated decades ago. The guardian visited again tonight. He perched on the railing until the moon rose high, watching the woods as if listening to something I couldn't hear. He is restless. The forest is changing. A chill ran through me. Guardian. The word echoed in my mind, stirring something that felt like recognition. I read on, my heart thudding softly in my chest. He is not just an owl. He never has been. He shifts when the forest calls him, when danger stirs. He protects this place, and he protects me. I don't know why he chose me, but I am grateful. My fingers tightened around the feather. The owl. Rowan. The way he'd looked at me in the clearing, the way his eyes had seemed to glow with something ancient and knowing, it all clicked into place with a quiet, startling certainty. I turned another page. He told me once that our family is tied to the forest, that we carry something in our blood that anchors the magic here. I don't fully understand it, but I trust him. He has never lied to me. My breath came shallow and slow. Anchors. Magic. Bloodlines. It sounded like a fairy tale, and yet, the feather in my hand pulsed again, warm and alive. I swallowed hard and kept reading. He watches over me every night. Sometimes I see him in his human form, standing at the edge of the clearing, silent and still. Other times he comes to me as an owl, his eyes bright with warnings I can't decipher. But he is always there. Always. My heart twisted. My grandmother had never mentioned any of this, not once. She'd told stories, yes, but never like this. Never with this kind of intimacy, this kind of trust. I wondered how long she'd kept this secret, how much she'd chosen not to tell me. And why. I turned the page again, but this time the words blurred. I blinked, realizing my eyes were stinging. I closed the journal gently and held it against my chest, letting the weight of it settle into me. The cottage felt warmer now, as if my grandmother's presence lingered in the walls, in the pages, in the feather still clutched in my hand. A soft sound drifted through the open window, a distant hoot, low and melodic. My breath hitched. I stood slowly, moving toward the window as if drawn by an invisible thread. The forest stretched out behind the cottage, darkening as the sun dipped lower. The trees swayed gently, their branches whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. Another hoot echoed, closer this time. I stepped onto the porch, the boards cool beneath my feet. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and something sweeter, something like memory. The sky was shifting to twilight, the first stars beginning to appear. And there, perched on the railing exactly where he'd been last night, was the white owl. He looked at me with those pale, luminous eyes, unblinking and steady. My heart thudded painfully, a mix of awe and something deeper, something I didn't want to name yet. I held up the feather, letting it catch the fading light. "Was this from you?" I whispered. The owl tilted his head, the movement slow and deliberate. His gaze flicked to the feather, then back to me. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, soft and steady, like a quiet affirmation. "I read her journal," I said softly. "I know you were with her. I know you protected her." The owl blinked once, a slow, almost solemn gesture. "And now you're here," I whispered. "Watching me." The breeze stirred, brushing my hair across my cheek. The owl's feathers ruffled in response, shimmering faintly in the twilight. For a moment, the world felt suspended, the forest holding its breath. "I don't understand any of this," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not afraid." The owl let out a soft, almost tender sound, something between a hoot and a sigh. Then, with a graceful sweep of his wings, he lifted off the railing and soared into the darkening sky, disappearing into the trees with a whisper of feathers. I stood there long after he was gone, the feather warm in my hand, the journal pressed against my chest. The forest hummed softly around me, alive and watchful. I didn't know what was happening or why Rowan had appeared to me or what my grandmother had meant about our family's connection to the woods. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The owl wasn't just an owl. And Rowan wasn't just a man. And whatever bound them to this place, whatever bound them to me, was only beginning to reveal itself. The night settled around me like a promise, soft and full of secrets. And I stepped back inside the cottage, ready to uncover every one of them. Chapter 4. The storm rolled in just after midnight, the kind of storm that didn't bother with thunder or lightning, but instead pressed against the cottage with a heavy, restless wind. I'd been lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the branches scrape softly against the roof. Sleep felt impossible. My mind kept circling back to the journal, to the owl, to Rowan's pale eyes in the clearing. Every time I closed my own eyes, I saw him standing there, half in shadow, as if he belonged more to the forest than to the world I knew. I turned onto my side, pulling the quilt tighter around me. The cottage creaked with the shifting wind, the sound familiar and comforting. My grandmother had always said the house spoke when it wanted company. Tonight, it felt like it was whispering warnings instead. A sudden thud against the porch made me sit up straight. It wasn't the sound of a branch falling or something blown by the wind. It was heavier, solid, alive. My heart hammered as I pushed the quilt aside and swung my legs out of bed. The floor was cold beneath my feet, grounding me just enough to keep me moving. I grabbed the nearest sweater and pulled it over my head as I crept toward the front door. The feather on the nightstand pulsed faintly, as if sensing something I couldn't yet see. Another sound, softer this time, like a groan, echoed from outside. I hesitated only a moment before unlocking the door and pulling it open. The porch light flickered weakly, casting a pale glow over the wooden boards. And there, slumped against the railing, was Rowan. My breath caught in my throat. He was in human form, but barely. His body trembled with each shallow breath, his clothes torn and streaked with dirt and something darker. His hair clung to his forehead, damp with sweat or rain, I couldn't tell which. His eyes were half closed, but when he heard the door open, he lifted his head just enough to look at me. "Mara," his voice was barely a whisper, rough and strained. I rushed to him, dropping to my knees beside his collapsed form. "Rowan, what happened? Are you hurt?" He tried to shake his head, but the movement was weak, almost imperceptible. "Shift. Too soon," he murmured. "Forest. Weakening." His words made no sense, but the pain etched into his features was unmistakable. I reached out, my hands trembling, and touched his shoulder. His skin was burning hot beneath my fingers, like he was fevered from the inside out. "You need help," I said, my voice shaking. "Come inside. Please." He didn't argue. He couldn't. When I slipped my arm under his and tried to lift him, he leaned into me with a weight that nearly knocked me off balance. He was heavier than he looked, solid and warm, his breath brushing against my neck in uneven bursts. I guided him inside, step by slow step, until we reached the couch. He collapsed onto it with a soft groan, his head falling back against the cushions. I knelt beside him again, brushing damp hair away from his forehead. His eyes fluttered open, meeting mine with a look so raw and vulnerable it made my chest ache. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't want you to see me like this." "You don't have to apologize," I said softly. "Just tell me what to do." He closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. "Nothing. I just need to rest. Shifting takes strength." "And the forest," his voice trailed off, as if the words were too heavy to finish. I swallowed hard. "You shifted tonight?" He nodded weakly. "I tried. But something is wrong. The forest is sick. It drains me." I didn't understand, not fully, but I didn't need to. I could see the truth in the way his body trembled, in the way his breath hitched with every movement. I reached for the blanket draped over the back of the couch and pulled it over him, tucking it gently around his shoulders. His eyes opened again, softer this time. "You're kind," he murmured. "Like her." My breath caught. "My grandmother?" He nodded. "She helped me once. When I was like this." The image of my grandmother tending to him, this mysterious, beautiful, impossible man, sent a strange warmth through me. "She never told me. She wanted to protect you," he said. "From all of this." I sat back on my heels, studying him. His face was pale, but even in his weakened state, there was something undeniably striking about him. Something ancient. Something otherworldly. The air around him felt charged, humming with a quiet energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. "Rowan," I said softly, "what are you?" His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the room felt impossibly still. The storm outside faded into a distant murmur. The only sound was his uneven breathing. "I am the guardian of these woods," he said finally. "A shifter. Bound to protect this land, and your family." The words settled over me like a blanket of snow, soft, cold, breathtaking. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know how to make sense of any of it. But I believed him. Somehow, impossibly, I believed him. He watched me carefully, as if waiting for fear to bloom in my eyes. But all I felt was a strange, overwhelming tenderness. "You're safe here," I whispered. "I'll take care of you." His breath hitched, and for a moment, something flickered across his face, surprise, gratitude, something deeper I couldn't name. He reached out, his fingers brushing mine in a touch so light it felt like a question. The moment our skin met, the lamps flickered. A soft hum filled the air, warm and electric, like the forest itself was exhaling. Rowan's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't pull away. Neither did I. The warmth spread up my arm, settling in my chest, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. "Mara," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I squeezed his hand gently. "Rest. We can talk when you're stronger." His eyes drifted closed, his breathing evening out as exhaustion pulled him under. I stayed beside him long after he fell asleep, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the way the blanket shifted with each breath. The storm outside softened to a gentle patter, the wind quieting as if the forest itself were settling down to sleep. I brushed my fingers over the feather still tucked in my pocket, feeling its familiar warmth. Everything was changing. Everything was shifting. And somehow I knew this was only the beginning. Rowan had come to me broken and vulnerable, but I didn't feel afraid. I felt connected, as if some invisible thread had tied us together long before tonight. As I sat there in the dim glow of the cottage, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, one truth settled deep in my bones. I wasn't alone anymore. And neither was he. Chapter 5. Morning came slowly, as if the forest itself were reluctant to wake. Pale light seeped through the curtains in soft ribbons, brushing across the floorboards and creeping toward the couch where Rowan slept. I had drifted off in the armchair beside him sometime after dawn, my head resting against the worn fabric, the blanket still wrapped around his shoulders. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was him. He looked different in the morning light, less otherworldly, more human, though still impossibly striking. His breathing was steady now, the tension gone from his jaw, his features softened by sleep. A lock of dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and without thinking, I reached out to brush it away. My fingers hovered just above his skin before I caught myself and pulled back, my heart thudding a little too fast. I stood slowly, stretching the stiffness from my limbs. The cottage was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt full rather than empty. I moved to the kitchen, filling the kettle and setting it on the stove. The soft clink of metal against metal echoed through the room, and I glanced back toward the couch, half expecting him to stir. He didn't. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the table, watching the steam curl upward in delicate spirals. My thoughts drifted to the journal, to the words my grandmother had written about the guardian, about the bond between him and our family. I thought of the feather, still warm in my pocket, and the way the lamps had flickered when Rowan touched my hand. None of it made sense, and yet, it felt right. Familiar. Like stepping into a story I'd always known but forgotten. A soft sound broke the silence, a quiet inhale, sharper than the rest. I turned to see Rowan shifting beneath the blanket, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, he looked disoriented, his gaze unfocused. Then his eyes found mine, and something warm flickered there. "Mara," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. I set my cup down and crossed the room, kneeling beside the couch. "How do you feel?" He blinked slowly, as if assessing himself. "Better," he said, though his voice was still weak. "Thanks to you." "You don't have to thank me," I said softly. "You were hurt. Anyone would have helped." He shook his head, the movement small but firm. "Not anyone." There was something in his tone, something quiet and earnest, that made my breath catch. I looked away, suddenly aware of how close we were, how his warmth radiated through the blanket. "Do you want water?" I asked, needing something to do with my hands. He nodded, and I stood to fetch a glass. When I returned, he pushed himself up slowly, wincing as he shifted his weight. I slipped an arm behind his back without thinking, steadying him. His breath hitched at the contact, and for a moment we froze, his shoulder warm beneath my hand, his gaze locked on mine. "Thank you," he whispered. I swallowed, my throat suddenly tight. "Here," I said, offering the glass. He drank slowly, his fingers brushing mine as he took it. The moment our skin touched, a soft hum filled the air, subtle, warm, like the faint vibration of a distant melody. I felt it travel up my arm, settling in my chest, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Rowan's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't pull away. "You feel it too," he said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. He set the glass down, his hand lingering near mine. "It's the bond," he said. "It's waking." I frowned, my pulse quickening. "What bond?" He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "The connection between the guardian and the one he protects. It's ancient. Older than these woods. Your grandmother had it too." I sank onto the edge of the couch, my heart pounding. "But why me?" "Because you're her blood," he said softly. "Because the forest recognizes you. Because," he paused, his gaze dropping to our hands. "Because you're meant to." The words settled over me like a warm blanket, comforting and terrifying all at once. I looked down at my hand, still tingling from his touch. "What does it mean?" I whispered. "It means I can sense you," he said. "Your emotions. Your presence. Your fear. Your warmth." His voice softened on the last word, almost reverent. "And you can sense me, even if you don't realize it yet." I thought of the clearing, of the way I'd felt drawn to him before I even knew his name. I thought of the owl on the porch, the way my chest had warmed when he looked at me. I thought of the feather, pulsing softly in my pocket. "I felt something last night," I admitted. "When you touched my hand." He nodded. "The bond responds to contact. To trust. To emotion." Emotion. The word lingered between us, heavy with meaning. I looked at him, really looked at him, the pale eyes, the quiet strength, the vulnerability he'd shown me without hesitation. Something inside me shifted, a soft click of recognition. "What happens now?" I asked. He leaned back against the cushions, exhaustion still tugging at his features. "Now you learn," he said. "About the forest. About your grandmother. About what you are." I blinked. "What I am." He met my gaze, his expression gentle. "You're not just a visitor here, Mara. You're part of this place. The forest responds to you. It always has." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "I don't understand." "You will," he said softly. "In time." A quiet moment settled between us, warm and fragile. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world washed clean and still. The cottage felt like a cocoon, holding us in a space where nothing existed except the soft rhythm of his breathing and the faint hum of the bond between us. Rowan's eyes drifted closed again, his strength not yet fully returned. I pulled the blanket up around his shoulders, my fingers brushing his cheek for the briefest moment. His skin was warm, his breath steady. As I watched him sleep, a strange certainty settled deep in my chest. Whatever this bond was, whatever it meant, it wasn't something to fear. It was something to follow. Something that felt like coming home. And as the forest whispered softly outside the windows, I knew this was only the beginning of something far bigger than either of us. Chapter 6. The forest felt different the next morning, as if it had woken up on the wrong side of the bed. Even before I stepped outside, I sensed it, an uneasy stillness that pressed against the windows and seeped through the walls of the cottage. Rowan was still asleep on the couch, his breathing steady but shallow, his skin pale in a way that made worry coil tight in my stomach. I watched him for a long moment, brushing my fingers lightly over the blanket tucked around him. He didn't stir. The feather in my pocket pulsed faintly, warm against my thigh, as if urging me to pay attention. I slipped on my boots and stepped outside, closing the door softly behind me. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of pine and something sharper, something metallic, like the air before a storm. The trees stood unnaturally still, their branches barely moving despite the breeze. Even the birds were quiet, their usual morning chatter replaced by a heavy silence that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I walked down the porch steps, scanning the tree line. The forest felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but unsettled. Like it was holding its breath. A sudden rustle to my left made me jump. A rabbit darted across the yard, its movements frantic, its eyes wide with fear. It disappeared into the underbrush without looking back. A moment later, a pair of deer burst through the trees, their hooves thudding against the earth as they fled deeper into the woods. I'd never seen deer run like that, not unless something was chasing them. My heart pounded. I took a step forward, then another, drawn toward the trail that led into the forest. The air grew colder as I approached the tree line, the shadows darker, thicker. The feather in my pocket wormed again, a soft pulse that felt almost like a warning. I hesitated, glancing back at the cottage. Rowan was inside, weak and recovering. I shouldn't wander too far. But something tugged at me, a quiet pull in my chest that felt like the forest whispering my name. I stepped onto the trail. The moment my foot touched the packed earth, the air shifted. A low groan echoed through the trees, like wood bending under an invisible weight. I froze, listening. The sound came again, deep, mournful, almost alive. The trees swayed, though there was no wind. Okay, I whispered to myself. That's not creepy at all. I moved slowly, my boots crunching softly against fallen leaves. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became, thick with tension. Shadows clung to the edges of the path, stretching long and thin like fingers reaching for me. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my spine. A sudden crack echoed through the forest, a branch snapping somewhere ahead. I stopped, my breath catching. The forest went silent again, the kind of silence that felt deliberate. Mara. I spun around. Rowan stood a few feet behind me, leaning heavily against a tree. His hair was tousled, his clothes rumpled, and he looked like he'd barely managed to stay upright. But his eyes, those pale, luminous eyes, were sharp with concern. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice strained. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, hurrying to his side. "You shouldn't be up. You're still weak." He shook his head, wincing slightly. "I felt you leave. The bond, it pulled me awake. The bond." The word sent a shiver through me, warm and unsettling. I slipped an arm around his waist, steadying him. He leaned into me, his breath brushing against my temple. "The forest is wrong today," I said quietly. "I can feel it." "So can I," he murmured. "It's getting worse." We stood there for a moment, listening to the uneasy groans of the trees. Rowan's hand found mine, his fingers curling around my own with a quiet urgency. "I need to show you something," he said. "But we can't go far." "Not yet." I nodded, letting him guide me deeper along the trail. His steps were slow, careful, but determined. The forest seemed to react to him, the shadows shifting, the air humming with a strange energy. It was as if the woods recognized him, feared for him. We reached a small clearing, not the one from before but another, darker and colder. The ground here felt different beneath my feet, softer, almost spongy, as if the earth itself were weakening. Rowan knelt beside a patch of wilted ferns, his hand trembling as he brushed his fingers over the leaves. "This shouldn't be happening," he whispered. "The forest spirit is fading." I knelt beside him. What does that mean? It means the heart of the woods is dying, he said, his voice tight with pain. And with it, so am I. My breath caught. Rowan. He shook his head, cutting me off. I'm tied to this place. To its magic. When it weakens, I weaken. When it suffers, I suffer. I stared at the wilted ferns, the darkened soil, the way the air seemed to pulse with a sickly energy. What's causing it? I don't know, he said. But it's getting stronger. And it knows you're here. A chill ran down my spine. Me? He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes filled with something like fear and something like awe. You're connected to this forest in ways you don't understand. It feels you. It recognizes you. And whatever is hurting it, it senses you too. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. What do we do? For now, he said softly, we go back. You're not ready to face what's out here. And I'm not strong enough to protect you if something happens. The word protect sent a warm ache through my chest, but I didn't argue. I slipped my arm around him again, helping him to his feet. He leaned into me, his weight heavy but familiar, as if he'd done this before, leaned on someone he trusted. As we made our way back toward the cottage, the forest groaned again, louder this time, the sound echoing through the trees like a warning. Rowan tightened his grip on my hand, his jaw clenched. It's waking, he whispered. And it's angry. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what might be watching us from the shadows. When we reached the edge of the yard, the air lightened, the tension easing just enough for me to breathe again. Rowan sagged against me, exhausted. Let's get you inside, I said, guiding him toward the porch. He nodded weakly, his eyes half closed. Mara, be careful. The forest isn't what it used to be. I helped him inside, settling him back onto the couch. His hand lingered on mine, warm and trembling. Stay close, he whispered. I'm not going anywhere, I said softly. As he drifted into sleep, the feather in my pocket pulsed again, warm, steady, alive. The forest was stirring. And whatever was coming, I knew it was only the beginning. Chapter 7. The cottage felt heavier that evening, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Rowan slept fitfully on the couch, his brow furrowed, his body tense even in rest. Every so often, he murmured something under his breath, words I couldn't quite make out, but they sounded like warnings or maybe pleas. I sat beside him, the journal open in my lap, the feather warm against my thigh. The lamps cast a soft golden glow across the room, but even their light felt dimmer than usual, as if the forest's sickness had seeped into the house. I turned another page in the journal, careful not to tear the fragile paper. My grandmother's handwriting flowed across the page in elegant loops, steady and sure. She had written so much, more than I'd realized. Notes about the forest, about the guardian, about the strange magic that pulsed beneath the soil. But tonight, one entry caught my eye, dated years before I was born. He came to me wounded again. The forest was restless, and he bore the marks of its pain. I tended to him as best I could, though I fear my strength is not enough. He told me something tonight, something I have not been able to stop thinking about. Our family is tied to this place in ways I never understood. We are anchors, he said. The forest needs us as much as we need it. I read the words twice, my heart thudding softly in my chest. Anchors. The word felt heavy, important. I turned the page. He said the bond is passed down through blood. That one day, someone after me will inherit it. Someone who will feel the forest the way I do. Someone the guardian will be drawn to. My breath caught. I stared at the words, my fingers trembling slightly. Someone after me. Someone the guardian will be drawn to. Me. I closed the journal slowly, pressing my palm against the worn cover. The room felt suddenly too small, too warm, too full of secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to carry. I looked at Rowan, his face pale in the lamplight, his breathing uneven. The guardian. The one my grandmother had trusted, had cared for, had written about with such tenderness. And now he was here. With me. I stood and crossed the room, pacing slowly as I tried to make sense of everything. The forest's sickness. Rowan's weakness. The bond awakening between us. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind, soft and insistent. The forest needs us as much as we need it. A soft sound behind me made me turn. Rowan shifted on the couch, his eyes fluttering open. They were unfocused at first, hazy with exhaustion, but when they found me, something in them sharpened. "Mara," he whispered. I moved to his side, kneeling beside him. "I'm here." He swallowed, his throat working. "You read the journal." It wasn't a question. I nodded. His gaze softened, though pain still lingered in the lines of his face. "She wanted to tell you," he said quietly. "But she didn't know how." "Tell me what?" My voice came out softer than I intended, almost fragile. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine. "The truth about who you are." I felt my breath hitch. "Rowan, what am I?" He reached for my hand, his fingers trembling as they brushed mine. The moment our skin touched, the familiar hum pulsed through the air, warm, steady, alive. He closed his eyes briefly, as if drawing strength from the contact. "You're the last of your line," he said softly. "The last anchor. The forest's magic is tied to your family. Without you, it weakens." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "But I don't have magic. I'm just—" "You're not just anything," he said, his voice firm despite his weakness. "You feel the forest. You hear it. You sensed its sickness before I told you. You felt the bond before you knew what it was." I looked down at our joined hands, the warmth spreading through my chest. "I don't understand any of this." "You will," he murmured. "Your grandmother did. She learned to listen, to trust the forest, to trust me." I swallowed hard. "She cared about you." He nodded, his expression softening. "She did. She was kind, brave. She saved my life more than once." A pang of emotion tightened my chest. "Why didn't she tell me?" "She wanted to protect you," he said. "She knew the bond would awaken in you one day. She wanted you to have a normal life until then." I let out a shaky breath. "And now it's awakened." His eyes met mine, pale and luminous. "Yes." The word hung between us, heavy with meaning. I felt it deep in my chest, in the warmth of his hand, in the quiet hum of the cottage. The bond. The connection. The pull I'd felt from the moment I saw him in the clearing. "Rowan," I whispered, "why do I feel like I've known you longer than a day?" He exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to our hands. "Because you have." My heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" He looked up, his eyes filled with something raw and vulnerable. "I've watched over you since you were a child. Always from a distance. Always in all form. Your grandmother asked me to. She wanted you safe." The room tilted slightly, the weight of his words settling over me like a blanket. You were the owl I used to see in the backyard. The one that sat on the fence every night." He nodded. "You always waved at me." A soft, breathless laugh escaped me. "I thought I imagined that." "You didn't," he said gently. "You never imagined me." Emotion swelled in my chest, warm, overwhelming, impossible to name. I reached up and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, my fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. His eyes fluttered closed at the touch, his breath catching softly. "Why didn't you ever show yourself?" I whispered. "Because I wasn't supposed to," he said. "The bond wasn't ready. You weren't ready." And he hesitated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't trust myself." My heart tightened. "Why?" His eyes opened, meeting mine with a depth that made my breath catch. "Because I cared too much." Even then, the room felt impossibly still. The forest outside seemed to lean in, listening. The feather in my pocket pulsed softly, as if echoing his words. I swallowed, my voice barely audible. "Rowan." He reached up, his fingers brushing my cheek with a tenderness that made my eyes sting. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "Just know that you're not alone in this. You never were." I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes for a moment. His hand was warm, steady, grounding. When I opened my eyes again, he was watching me with an expression so gentle it made my chest ache. "Rest," I whispered. "We'll figure this out together." He nodded, exhaustion pulling at his features. As he drifted back to sleep, his hand remained in mine, our fingers intertwined. The bond hummed softly between us, warm and alive. I sat beside him long into the night, the journal open on my lap, the feather glowing faintly in the dim light. The truth of my lineage had changed everything. But it hadn't scared me. If anything, it made me feel more connected to the forest, to my grandmother, to Rowan. And as the forest whispered softly outside the windows, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't just part of the story. I was meant for it. Chapter 8. The forest called to me before Rowan even opened his eyes. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. More like a pressure behind my ribs, a soft tugging sensation that grew stronger with every passing minute. I stood at the window, watching the early morning light spill across the yard, pale and thin, as if the sun itself were struggling to break through the sickness hanging over the woods. The trees looked darker today, their branches drooping, their leaves dull. Even the air felt heavier, thick with something I couldn't name. Behind me, Rowan stirred. I turned to see him pushing himself upright on the couch, his movements slow and strained. His hair fell into his eyes, and he brushed it back with a trembling hand. He looked exhausted, paler than yesterday, shadows beneath his eyes like bruises. But when he saw me, something warm flickered across his face. "You feel it," he said softly. I nodded, my throat tight. "It's getting worse." He exhaled, leaning back against the cushions. "The forest spirit is fading faster than I expected. I can barely sense it anymore." I crossed the room and knelt beside him, taking his hand without thinking. His fingers curled around mine instantly, as if he'd been waiting for the contact. The bond hummed between us, warm and steady, grounding me even as fear twisted in my chest. "What do we do?" I whispered. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. "There's a ritual," he said finally. "An ancient one. Your grandmother performed it once, years ago. It renewed the bond between her and the forest. It strengthened me." My breath caught. "And I can do it?" "You're the only one who can," he said. "But it's dangerous. It requires trust, vulnerability. From both of us." I swallowed hard. "Tell me what I need to do." He hesitated, his thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles. "We have to go to the heart of the forest. To the sacred clearing. The ritual must be performed there at dusk." "Dusk," I repeated, feeling the words settle into me like a promise. He nodded. "The forest spirit is weakest then. But it's also when the veil between us and the magic is thinnest." I squeezed his hand gently. "We'll do it. Together." His eyes softened, something like relief washing over his features. "Mara, you don't understand what this means. The ritual binds us. Not just to the forest, but to each other." A warmth bloomed in my chest, soft and overwhelming. "I'm not afraid." He closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. When he opened them again, they were filled with something deep and unspoken. "Then we'll go." The rest of the day passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Rowan rested, gathering what little strength he had left, while I prepared in the only ways I knew how, reading my grandmother's journal, memorizing her notes, letting the forest's pull guide me. The feather pulsed steadily in my pocket, warm and alive, as if encouraging me forward. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Rowan stood from the couch. He swayed slightly, and I rushed to his side, slipping an arm around him. He leaned into me, his breath warm against my temple. "Ready?" he murmured. I nodded, though my heart was pounding. "Let's go." We stepped outside together, the air cool and sharp against my skin. The forest loomed ahead, darker than it had ever been, the shadows thick and restless. But with Rowan beside me, the fear felt distant, muted by the warmth of his hand in mine. The trail to the clearing felt longer than before, the trees groaning softly as we passed, their branches swaying without wind. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my chest. Rowan's steps slowed, his breath coming in shallow bursts. "We're close," he whispered. I tightened my grip on him. "Lean on me." He did. When we reached the clearing, the last light of day filtered through the canopy, casting long, trembling shadows across the ground. The air hummed with a strange energy, weak, flickering, like a dying heartbeat. The center of the clearing pulsed faintly, a soft glow barely visible beneath the earth. Rowan sank to his knees, his body trembling. I knelt beside him, my heart racing. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He reached for my hand, his fingers cold. "Place your palm on the ground." Over the heart of the forest. I did. The earth was warm beneath my skin, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat struggling to continue. "Now," Rowan said, his voice strained, "you have to anchor me. Hold on to me. Don't let go, no matter what happens." I turned to him, my breath catching. "Rowan." He cupped my cheek with a trembling hand, his touch soft and desperate. "Trust me." "I do," I whispered. He closed his eyes, and the air shifted. A soft glow enveloped him, spreading from his chest outward, flickering like candlelight. His body tensed, his breath hitching as the shift began, not the smooth, graceful transformation I'd imagined, but something raw and painful. His bones seemed to tremble beneath his skin, his muscles tightening, his jaw clenched in silent agony. "Rowan," I breathed, reaching for him. He grabbed my hand, his grip fierce, grounding himself in me. The bond surged between us, warm and electric, flooding my chest with a heat that made my eyes sting. The forest responded instantly, the trees groaning, the air humming, the ground pulsing beneath my palm. "Don't let go," he gasped. "I won't," I whispered, leaning closer, my forehead brushing his. "I'm here. I'm right here." Light burst from the ground, swirling around us in soft, shimmering waves. Rowan's body arched, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his fingers digging into my hand. I held on tighter, anchoring him, grounding him, pouring every ounce of trust and warmth and emotion I had into the bond. The forest roared. Wind whipped through the clearing, leaves spiraling around us in a frenzy. The glow beneath my palm brightened, spreading outward, filling the clearing with a soft, golden light. Rowan's form flickered, human, owl, human again, caught between worlds, between shapes, between breaths. "Rowan," I whispered, tears slipping down my cheeks. "Come back to me." His eyes snapped open, bright, luminous, filled with something ancient and powerful. And then, with a final burst of light, the forest exhaled. The wind stilled. The glow softened. The earth beneath my hand pulsed steadily, strong and sure. Rowan collapsed against me, his breath warm against my neck, his body trembling but whole. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close, my heart pounding with relief and something deeper, something I didn't dare name yet. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes meeting mine. They glowed softly, renewed, alive. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it," I corrected, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. He leaned into my touch, his breath warm against my cheek. "Mara." I pressed my forehead to his, closing my eyes. "I know." The forest hummed softly around us, alive once more. And in that moment, with Rowan's arms around me and the magic of the woods pulsing beneath us, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 9. The walk back from the clearing felt different than the walk there. The forest, once heavy and suffocating with sickness, now breathed around us, soft, warm, alive. The leaves shimmered faintly in the moonlight as if dusted with silver. The air hummed with a quiet magic that brushed against my skin like a whisper of gratitude. Even the shadows felt gentler, no longer reaching or restless, but settling into their places like animals curling up to sleep. Rowan leaned against me as we walked, his arm draped over my shoulders, his weight warm and solid. He wasn't weak anymore, not like before, but he wasn't fully steady either. His body trembled with the aftershocks of the ritual, the magic still settling inside him. Every so often, he would pause, closing his eyes as if listening to something only he could hear. Each time, a soft glow flickered beneath his skin, faint but unmistakable. "You're glowing again," I whispered once, unable to help myself. He opened his eyes, and the pale light in them made my breath catch. "It'll fade," he murmured. "The forest is welcoming me back." "Welcoming us," I corrected softly. His gaze lingered on me for a long moment, warm and full of something that made my heart flutter. "Yes," he said. "Us." We reached the edge of the yard just as the moon climbed higher, casting a soft silver sheen over the cottage. It looked different tonight, brighter, almost enchanted, as if the forest's renewed magic had seeped into the walls. Rowan paused, his hand tightening around mine. "Thank you," he said quietly. I turned to him, surprised. "For what?" "For saving me," he said. "For saving the forest. For trusting me when you had no reason to." I shook my head, emotion tightening my throat. "I didn't save you, Rowan. We saved each other." He smiled then, soft, slow, the kind of smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You don't know what you've done," he murmured. "What it means." "Then tell me," I whispered. He hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the trees. The leaves rustled softly, as if urging him on. When he looked back at me, his expression was open in a way I hadn't seen before, unguarded, vulnerable, achingly sincere. "The bond between us," he said, "it's stronger now. Deeper. The ritual didn't just renew the forest. It renewed me. And it tied me to you in a way that I've never experienced." My heart thudded, warm and unsteady. "Rowan." He stepped closer, his fingers brushing mine. The touch sent a soft pulse of warmth through my chest, the bond humming gently between us. "I felt connected to you since the moment you arrived," he said. "Even before you knew who I was. Even before you knew what you were. But now, it's different. Clearer." I swallowed hard, my breath catching. "What do you feel?" He lifted a hand, hesitating for a heartbeat before cupping my cheek. His palm was warm, his thumb brushing lightly along my skin. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact, the forest fading into a soft blur around us. "I feel you," he whispered. "Your heartbeat, your fear, your strength, your warmth. I feel everything you feel when you look at me." My breath hitched. "And what do I feel?" He smiled again, softer this time. "You feel safe, curious, drawn. And something else you're not ready to name." Heat bloomed in my cheeks, but I didn't look away. "And you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "What do you feel when you look at me?" His thumb stilled against my cheek. His eyes, pale and luminous, held mine with a depth that made my chest ache. "I feel like I've been waiting for you," he said softly. "For a very long time." The words settled over me like a warm blanket, comforting and overwhelming all at once. I leaned into his touch, my breath trembling. The bond pulsed between us, warm and steady, as if echoing his words. "Rowan," I whispered, "I don't know what this is yet. But I feel it too." His breath caught, a soft sound that felt like relief. He leaned his forehead against mine, his hand sliding to the back of my neck, his fingers threading gently through my hair. The closeness was dizzying, intimate in a way that made my heart flutter wildly. "You don't have to know," he murmured. "Not yet. Just stay with me." "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered. He closed his eyes, exhaling softly. "Good." We stood there for a long moment, wrapped in moonlight and quiet magic, the forest humming softly around us. When he finally pulled back, it was only enough to look at me again, his expression tender. "Come," he said. "There's something I want to show you." He stepped away from me, and before I could ask what he meant, his form shimmered, soft light rippling across his skin. His body shifted, bones reshaping, feathers unfurling in a cascade of pale white. In a heartbeat, the man was gone, replaced by the owl, majestic, luminous, his wings spreading wide in the moonlight. I gasped softly, all washing over me. He was beautiful, more beautiful than I remembered. His feathers glowed faintly, the magic of the forest pulsing through him. He hopped closer, his head tilting as he looked at me with those pale, intelligent eyes. "Rowan," I whispered, reaching out. He leaned into my touch, his feathers soft beneath my fingers. A warmth spread through me, gentle and familiar, the bond humming in quiet contentment. Then, with a soft rustle of wings, he shifted back, light swirling around him, feathers dissolving into skin, wings folding into arms. He stood before me again, human, his breath warm against my cheek. "Now you've seen all of me," he said softly. I smiled, my heart full. "I think I always did." He brushed a strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering. "Mara." I placed my hand over his, stopping him gently. You don't have to say it yet, I whispered. Just stay. He nodded, his eyes soft. Always. We walked back to the cottage together, his hand warm in mine, the forest glowing softly behind us. The night felt full of promise, quiet, tender, alive. And as we stepped inside, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, we would face it together. The Guardian Reborn. And the girl he was bound to. Chapter 10. The morning after the ritual felt like waking into a different world. The forest outside the cottage shimmered with a quiet, renewed life, the leaves catching the early sunlight in soft flashes of green and gold. Birds sang in the branches, real birds, not the frantic, frightened calls I'd grown used to hearing. Even the air felt lighter, as if the woods had finally exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. I stood on the porch with a mug of tea warming my hands, watching the forest stretch and stir like a waking giant. The breeze brushed against my skin, gentle and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It felt like a greeting, a welcome, a promise. Behind me, the door creaked softly. I didn't have to turn to know it was Rowan. His presence brushed against me before he spoke, a soft warmth at my back, a quiet hum in my chest, the bond settling into something steady and familiar. When he stepped beside me, the porch boards groaned under his weight, and I felt the warmth of him even before his arm brushed mine. "You're up early," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. I smiled into my mug. Couldn't stay in bed. The forest feels different. He leaned against the railing, his shoulder brushing mine. It is different. You did that. We did that, I corrected softly. He looked at me then, really looked, his pale eyes warm in the morning light. Yes, he said. We did. For a moment, we simply stood there, watching the forest breathe. The quiet between us wasn't empty, it was full, warm, threaded with something tender and unspoken. The bond hummed softly, a gentle pulse that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. Rowan exhaled slowly, his breath fogging in the cool air. The forest is stable now, he said. The spirit is strong again. It'll take time to fully recover, but it's safe. I nodded, letting the words settle into me. And you? He hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the trees. I'm stronger than I've been in years, he said. The ritual renewed me, anchored me. His eyes returned to mine, soft and earnest. Anchored me to you. My breath caught. The warmth in my chest spread, slow and steady, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Rowan. He reached for my hand, his fingers brushing mine before curling gently around them. I know you're still figuring out what all of this means, he said. The bond. The forest. Us. I don't want to rush you. I'm not rushing, I whispered. His thumb brushed the back of my hand, slow and tender. I've lived a long time, he said softly. Longer than you can imagine. And in all those years, I've never felt anything like this. Not with your grandmother. Not with anyone. Emotion tightened my throat. What do you feel? He stepped closer, his body warm against mine, his breath brushing my cheek. I feel like I've finally found where I belong, he murmured. With you. The words settled over me like a warm blanket, comforting and overwhelming all at once. I turned toward him fully, my free hand resting lightly against his chest. His heartbeat thudded beneath my palm, steady, strong, alive. I'm staying, I said softly. Here. In the cottage. In the forest. I don't want to leave. His breath hitched, a soft sound of relief. You're sure? I nodded. This place, it feels like home. And you, my voice faltered, but I didn't look away. You feel like home too. Something in his expression softened, melted, warmed. He lifted a hand to my cheek, his touch gentle, reverent. Mara, he whispered, as if saying my name was a prayer. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes for a moment. The bond pulsed between us, warm and steady, like a heartbeat shared. When I opened my eyes again, he was watching me with an expression so tender it made my chest ache. Come with me, he said suddenly, his voice soft but certain. Where? I asked, though I already knew. He smiled, a small, quiet smile that felt like sunlight. Just trust me. I set my mug down and took his hand. He led me down the porch steps, across the yard, and into the forest. The trees parted for us, their branches swaying gently as if guiding our path. The air grew warmer as we walked, the sunlight filtering through the canopy in soft, golden patches. We reached a small clearing, a different one than before. This one was quiet, peaceful, bathed in warm light. A fallen log sat near the center, covered in soft moss. Rowan stopped and turned to me, his hand still holding mine. "This is where your grandmother used to sit," he said. "Every morning. Every evening." She said it made her feel connected to the forest. To me. I looked around, imagining her here, smiling, peaceful, content. "It's beautiful. It's yours now," he said softly. "If you want it." I squeezed his hand. "I do." He stepped closer, his other hand lifting to brush a strand of hair from my face. "There's something else," he murmured. "Something I've wanted to tell you since the moment you arrived." My heart fluttered. "What is it?" He leaned in, his forehead resting gently against mine. His breath warmed my lips, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I love you." The words washed over me, warm and soft and utterly certain. My breath caught, my heart swelling with a feeling so deep it almost hurt. "Rowan," I whispered, my voice trembling, "I love you too." He exhaled a soft, shaky breath, as if he'd been holding it for years. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I wrapped my arms around him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. The forest hummed around us, alive and warm, as if celebrating with us. He kissed me then, soft, slow, full of emotion and warmth and the quiet certainty of someone who had waited a very long time. The bond pulsed between us, bright and steady, anchoring us to each other, to the forest, to the life we were beginning together. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine again, his breath warm and steady. "You were never meant to be alone in these woods," he whispered. "And neither were you," I said softly. We walked back to the cottage hand in hand, the forest glowing softly around us. The air felt warm, alive, full of promise. The cottage stood waiting, its windows glowing with soft light, its walls filled with memories and the promise of new ones. As we stepped onto the porch, Rowan shifted, light rippling across his skin, feathers unfurling in a soft cascade. The owl perched beside me, his pale eyes warm and familiar. I smiled, brushing my fingers gently along his feathers. "Come inside," I whispered. "You're home." He shifted back, his hand finding mine, his smile soft and full of quiet joy. "Yes," he said. "We are." And as the forest hummed softly around us, alive and whole once more, I knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning of our story. A home for two. A bond reborn. A future written in moonlight and feathers and the quiet magic of the woods.